Thank you, sir. We had a hearing a couple weeks ago talking about Russia. Among the witnesses, for example, was your predecessor. And the question was raised, is ERI to really deter Russia, or is it to make our allies feel better? And maybe it will do one, but not the latter, but not the former. What's your view of that?
So, sir, I would agree with parts of that, but I would like to elaborate on some others. I would agree that ERI does both assure our allies, and I believe ERI begins the movement or the changes we need to make to fully deter Russia. But it is a step along that path. For the past 2 decades, as you know, Mr. Chairman, we have been in a position where we have been trying to make a partner out of Russia and Europe. And we have downsized our forces, downsized our headquarters capabilities, etc., to become a command that was focused on engaging Russia as a partner and building partnership capacity in Europe. And what we now have is clearly not a partner in Russia. And so we have to begin reshaping the European command and the NATO force structure to be able now to confront someone that does not wish to share our norms and values in Europe. And that 20 years of change will not be overcome in 1 or 2 steps. ERI is one of the steps along the way to reposition us, I think, in forces, in
In China, and I'm sorry, this is an article entitled Eurasia's Coming Anarchy by Robert Kaplan. He says, in China and Russia, it is domestic insecurity that is breeding belligerence. And whereas aggression driven by domestic strength often follows a methodical, well-developed strategy, one that can be interpreted by other states, which can then react appropriately, that fueled by domestic crisis results in daring, reactive, impulsive behavior, which is much harder to forecast or counter. And then he goes on to say, part of what Putin's doing is for the more chaos he can generate abroad, the more valuable the autocratic stability he provides at home will appear. So I guess my interpretation of that is part of what's going on, especially in Russia and maybe China, is for domestic political concerns, they got to have outward aggression, and the last point was the more chaos out there, the more valuable he tries to make, he believes it makes him for his internal purposes to stay above power. But that makes it harder to deter, because if it's all about what's happening inside Russia, then maybe this deterrence and ERI and other things isn't really going to get much done. I'd appreciate your reaction to the thought and anything you can shed on that.
Thank you, Chairman. And I, again, would like to agree with some of the tenets, but elaborate on others. You have heard me say before that deterrence is in the mind of the deterred. And so we are after the mind and the decision-making process of Mr. Putin. And I did see some of the discussion you had with Jim Stavridis. And I would like to use a similar formulation in that what I believe Mr. Putin sees and will deter him is using all of the instruments of a nation's power, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. But they are all required. As you said in your opening statement, and I did in mine, Mr. Putin understands strength and recognizes weakness. If we only use the diplomatic, the informational, and the economic to address Mr. Putin, he will see that the military is absent, or, as I think Admiral Stavridis talked to you about, a lack of will to use the military may be absent. And so I think to deter Mr. Putin, we have to have an all-of-government response, which shows resistance diplomatically, informationally, militarily, and economically. And then important to the military piece is not only having the capability and the capacity, but showing the will to use it if and only if required. Could I then address the other two pieces of your question? First, exterior chaos. I believe exterior chaos is a tool that Mr. Putin likes to use to give him a platform to show that the great power of Russia needs to intervene in a West that cannot bring order to the world. And it gives him that platform to try to talk about the great Russia as an equal player on the stage, bringing order. The second piece that you talked about, sir, is domestic crisis inside the nation. I believe Mr. Putin is using a crisis inside his nation. I do believe that his people are feeling the dropping in oil prices, the sanctions, and the other things affecting his government. But he uses that to focus them on an external enemy to bring their focus to what he wants to do with his nation and his power. And he is now focusing his people completely on the United States first and foremost, and secondarily NATO, as an external enemy that they need to be ready to rise up to meet.
Thank you. Ms. Davis.